Turok. As a kid, I had very limited experience with Turok. I had a friend who was obsessed with it though, and every time that we'd play in the backyard, he would pretend to be Turok, and I would pretend that my parents weren't divorced. But anyway, let's take a look at Turok.
Turok, Dinosaur Hunter, released in North America and Europe on March 4th, 1997, and Japan on March 28th the same year. Turok went to show how good a first-person shooter game could be on the N64. Developed by Iguana Studios, Turok took the gaming world by storm, garnering positive reviews from pretty much every review outlet of the time, and in many people's eyes, it's one of the best the N64 has to offer. Even though it's not technically an N64 exclusive anymore, it's still seen as a staple from the system, and some would argue that it's the best first-person game from its time. But how does it hold up today, and how does it compare to what followed?
And what followed were 3 sequels, but today we're going to take a look at the one which some say is the best, Turok 2: Seeds of Evil.
Turok 2: Seeds of Evil, released on October 21st, 1998 in North America, and Europe on December 10th of the same year, and in Japan titled Violence Killer: Turok New Generation on June 18th, 1999. Turok 2 tried to take the unexpected success from the first game and use that momentum to make something magical, and as far as I've read, it succeeded, garnering almost universal critical acclaim. Turok 2 took it to the next step with incredible looking graphics, enemies that die faster depending where they're shot, and missions which were lacking from the first, and it became not only a sequel, but its very own experience.
Alright, the match is set. Turok, Dinosaur Hunter versus Turok 2: Seeds of Evil. There's a couple of rules that I want to set for this matchup though, and I want to state my biases before I begin. If you want to skip all this and go straight to the comparison, there's a timestamp right here. First off, this video will contain both story and design spoilers, so if you care about that kind of stuff and you don't want to be spoiled, then watch any other video. Also, this review will contain categories much like other versus videos of this style, but unlike other versus videos of this style, the categories do not determine the winner. Basically, whichever game I think is overall better will win, not the one that has more categories won, if that makes sense. The winner will also not necessarily be the game that I like more, but rather the one that I think is overall better. When it comes to these two games, I don't really have a bias, but if I had to pick one that I like more, I would have to say Turok 2, because I like its fleshed out worlds more. But which one is better? I guess that you'll have to watch the video to find. Turok 2. Turok 2 is the better game. Halfway through writing the script, I kind of realized that the winner would be obvious, so instead of trying to hide it, I decided just to say it flat out, and then try to justify it throughout my review. Turok 2 is better, and here's why.
First up is the stories of the games. Turok, Dinosaur Hunter's story goes like this. In Turok's universe, there is the Earth and the Lost World. Turok, whose name is Tal Set, is charged with protecting the barrier between these two worlds. The campaigner, an evil boy, wants to get a hold of a powerful weapon called the Chronoscepter and use it to destroy the barrier so that he may rule the world, but the Chronoscepter was broken into 8 different pieces. Apparently it's not that strong, and it's Turok's goal to get the Chronoscepter first so that he may stop the campaigner. About to get into ending spoilers, skip here to get past this portion. I figure that there are a fair share of you that may be interested in giving Turok a try, and I don't want to spoil the ending for you. Alright? At the end, Turok meets the campaigner, defeats him, then the campaigner's lair explodes, and the game ends. It also gives you a game over, which is a bit unsettling. Not much to spoil. The good guy wins. During the last 2 boss fights, if Turok dies, then there are special death sequences, but other than these, there's not much to spoil about the ending. Turok's story is told in the manual. Blech. Look, I get it. Back in the 90s, games would rely on the manual to tell stories, but honestly, I think by the time the N64 hit shelves, games could have put more effort into telling their stories. Even just text at the beginning of the game could be like, "There is bad man. Beat bad man with stick." Or something. Anything. Please. Turok's storytelling at the beginning is this. Collect the keys. Cool. What? Turok 2 takes place a while after the first game. Joshua Fireseed, that's the new Turok's real name, yes it is called by some alien babe to defend the universe. He needs to defeat the Primogen, a bad dude who is trapped inside something called a light ship, because he tried to view the creation of the universe. I don't quite get it, but we're moving forward. The events of the previous game caused him to awaken, so he's gathered an army with the goal of destroying 5 energy totems, because if they're destroyed, he can be set free, and the universe would be destroyed. During Turok's quest, he is gathering magic talismans, but there is a mysterious dude called Oblivion who attempts to lure Turok into traps. This is worth noting. Once again, about to step into spoiler territory, skip forward to right here if you don't want to know the end of Turok 2. I'm only 2 or so verses in of doing this, and I already hate it. At the end of Turok 2, Turok comes face to face with the Primogen, and of course, he wins. Why am I doing spoiler alerts for this? It's worth mentioning that at the end of the game, the alien babe from the beginning mentions that the mysterious dude, Oblivion, is still around, which is set up for a 3rd game in the series, Turok 3, the bad one, I hear. Now, this is my own personal thing, but this makes the story feel incomplete. When stories go out of their way to set up sequels, it usually comes at the expense of the original. Turok 2 setting up Turok 3 doesn't ruin the story by any means, but it does hurt the ending a bit. Turok 2's story is more complicated, but not by much. Its backstory is told in the manual, but moving forward, forward, the player gets a few cutscenes, one at the beginning, the end, and there are scenes which set the mood for each level. The storytelling is way better in Turok 2, no question about it. And this doesn't really apply, but I feel that it's worth mentioning. There are Turok comics, and from what I understand, they do give a bit of context for the first game, and even have stories that are in between the first and second games. If I'm correct, Turok actually started as a comic book going all the way back to the 1950s. Just an interesting fact that I'm sure some of you already knew. Moving on. Turok has really good controls. Arguably, the first game has better controls. I'm not even going to try to beat around that bush. In no way do I think GoldenEye or Perfect Dark control poorly, but I do feel a certain crispness in the movement when it comes to Turok. I don't think I've played another first-person game on the N64 that has controls that feel this smooth. You aim with the control stick, move with the C buttons, shuffle through the weapons with A and B, use the weapons with Z, jump with R, and toggle a map on and off with the L button. This really works for me. You can also change between running and walking with the D-pad. Sort of useless. I almost immediately got used to the controls, but there were times I'd forget how to properly aim because I'm not good. I suck at video games, and you should be watching literally any other YouTuber. The one thing I'm not a huge fan of is the jump, but it is less of a control thing and more of a design thing. I'll get to it. You can also swim in Turok, and the swimming is okay. You move forward, backward, and side to side with the C buttons, and look with the control stick. Swimming is pretty fast, but I do think that the game being first person is a bit troublesome, because it can be hard to tell where you are in the water at times. Once again, this is more of a design thing. Turok 2 essentially controls the same, but there are a couple differences. For example, you don't switch between running with the D-pad anymore, but can rather crouch with down, navigate between certain ammo like tech and regular arrows with up, navigate between weapons with left, and use a sniper scope with right. The jump isn't as exciting in this game because it's kind of wooden, which I guess is a pretty noticeable difference. You don't platform nearly as much, which is a positive, but something about this jump is so boring. In fact, moving in Turok 2 feels considerably slower. It lost that speed and energy from the first, and like I mentioned, Turok 1 feels great to move around in. Even the swimming in Seeds of Evil is slower. Everything is so slow in this game. In Turok 2, Turok can ride a dinosaur, Styracosaurus, but I called it Gabriel. It pretty much controls the same as Turok. You use the Z button to shoot, and the R button is also used for an alternative gun. Controlling the dinosaur is slow, but that's okay because there's a feeling of real power. These guns and grenade launchers are fantastic, and you can just run over enemies. It feels so great. One of the big appeals of games like Turok, Doom, and even GoldenEye is the weapons that you can get, and Turok, being a time-traveling Native American, gets some of the most varied weapons I've ever seen in a video game. I don't play very many video games though. You got the knife, bow and arrow, pistol, shotgun, minigun, grenade launcher, pulse rifle, alien weapon, shockwave weapon, and even the chronoceptor. Very varied, and I love it. That said, I pretty much stuck to just using the shotgun or pulse rifle. None of the weapons were difficult to use, but I didn't really know how to use the chronoceptor the first time I used it. Everything else, I knew immediately what it did. Turok 2 also comes with weapons, and the player actually gets them at a slower pace. In the first game, you get awesome weapons just in the first level, but in Turok 2, it takes until the third level to get to the really good stuff. Turok 2 has things like the Talons, Mag 60, Shredder, Plasma Rifle, a minigun that uses plasma energy, this boar thing that rips enemies' heads off, and so much more. There's even a weapon that makes traversing water easier. I should also mention that there are more options for underwater combat as it is, which is great. Weapons also seem to come with sort of upgrades, like the Mag is an upgrade from the pistol, and the Shredder is an upgraded shotgun. I like this to a degree because once you get those weapons, you'll use the better one automatically, but sometimes I just wanted to use the pistol, and shuffling between the weapons isn't time consuming, but it does take a few extra button presses to get through. I like most of the weapons, but I honestly stuck to using the Mag 60 for the most part, and I use the basic weapon and its upgrade, the Talons and War Claws, a lot more than in the first. Overall, I like the options for weapons in Turok 2 better. I don't like the movement nearly as much, but the weapons make up for it. Kind of. Alright, presentation. This time, I'll start off with the graphics. Turok, for the most part, looks good. It's very clearly a game from the N64, but I think it did what it could best. Like, if I compared it to Doom or Hexen, I think it holds up better visually. It's not as good as Perfect Dark or GoldenEye though. The stages are all pretty simple, and I think that they get the job done, with the exception of a couple notes, which I'll get to in a bit. For the most part, stages were presented in a fashion that made them separate from each other visually, for the most part. There were times when I thought one stage looked too much like another, but generally, if the player digs deeper into the stage, they'll find that it changes quite a bit. Enemies look as you would expect them to. I never once thought that this was a hamster. I think that the dinosaurs and robots in particular look great, like real good, and the bosses look wonderful, not you. Turok has two big problems though. Draw distance. Draw distance at this time in gaming was normal, but that doesn't mean it was okay in all instances. Usually, smart developers would use draw distance to set an atmosphere, and I think Turok does this well. Every level has a fog or darkness to it that helps to build tension for the game. There are issues that come with this though. You can't see enemies, which I'll get into more later, and every level has this. So every level, to a degree, feels the same in visual tone. There are differences, and levels do stand apart, but I got bored of seeing constant fog in the game. It just gets tiring on the eyes after a while. The other really big part visually is that underwater it can get too dark. It makes swimming, which has solid controls, feel uncontrollable because vision is impaired greatly at these points. The visuals in Turok 2 are a bit of a mixed bag, and the scenery is a lot more detailed. Every level also clearly has its own unique feel to it, and there are never moments where levels feel repeated visually. The enemies are also a lot more detailed, and actually they're a lot scarier in Turok 2. The draw distance came back, but I barely noticed it in this game for some reason. Maybe it's not as bad. However, in this game, during a few stages, it is considerably darker than the first to a point where you simply can't see anything. You can turn up the brightness, which really helps, but, and this is Turok 2's biggest problem, the frame rate takes a huge dive. Turn up the brightness and the game dies. Have a lot of enemies on the screen and the game has trouble breathing. Move and the game just kind of stutters. It's real bad in this game. The music in Turok is solid, but I have one issue with it. It was composed by Darren Mitchell. That's not my issue. That's the problem is that's not my issue. For starters, the music is super energetic, and I think it really helps to drive the player forward subconsciously. It has so much spice to it, and the tempo in every tune is so quick. There's never a dull moment essentially. You're going to war, you're hunting dinosaurs, but not really. Why is it called Dinosaur Hunter? There's special music for underwater too, and it really reminds me of the underwater tune in Donkey Kong Country. Like, it becomes a bit more relaxed, the tempo slows down, and it offers the player a break from the frenetic energy of the other tunes. They each have that jungle, forest, or cave-like feel to them. It's all in the percussion instruments, I think, and it's the kind of percussion instruments that I associate with movies that take place in the jungle, or a forest, or a cave. Indiana Jones. I can't remember a single moment where I thought this doesn't work here, and this isn't a negative, but music doesn't stand out. It really serves as background noise, and I think that's all okay. It blends with the game rather than trying to be a standout element. My negative point to Turok's tasty tunes is this. I had to go back and forth between levels repeatedly to really confirm that the tunes are different. There's nothing in these tracks that stands out too much to individualize them. The tracks aren't very different from one another, and I honestly think that they're interchangeable. Do they fit the feel of jungle, forest, or cave? Yes, but it's kind of a lethal lava land and shifting sand land situation where the music fits for both, even though they're different worlds. A lot of the percussion sounds seem to be the driving force of each track, and the same percussion instruments are used over and over again. It doesn't matter where the tracks are placed because a lot of them sound the same in tone. Honestly, if you were talented enough, you could probably make a mix between all these tunes with no problem. Chris?
What?
Turok 2 soundtrack fares a lot better in this aspect. It was also composed by Darren Mitchell, and each track is considerably different from one another while still containing a sort of unity. Port of Audio's track is super fast paced. River of Souls brings back the original Turok style. Death Marshes has a very low energy to it which slowly builds. Lair of the Blind Ones feels like a continuation of the Death Marshes tune, but it's more in your face from the get-go. And Hive of the Mantids uses string instruments a lot to sort of build up a scary tone. They fit their levels pretty well, and I think they really help to build the atmosphere. Like, for example, in Death Marshes, there are these trumpets and horns and such which really help to build up that wartime feeling. The first time I heard it, my heart skipped a beat. The music, like in the first, really helps to drive the player forward, but this time, it's a lot more noticeable because of its quality and how much variety there is. That said, it's not nearly as exciting. Drummy. Unlike the first, the music doesn't change when the player enters water. That's kind of a factor that I missed. Overall, Turok's music is good, but lacks a certain amount of variety. It's not good enough for me to want to download and listen to on my free time, but it still does what it needed to do. Turok 2's soundtrack is about the same quality, but it has a bit more variety. I still wouldn't put it on my playlist, with the exception of Level 3's track, but that doesn't make the soundtrack bad by any means. There's slight voice acting in these games. The first one just has Turok's grunts and cries. He will also scream who he is once he gets an extra life. Turok 2 has more voice acting. The alien at the beginning, her name is Aiden by the way, is voiced, and I think she was voiced well.
Greetings, Turok. I am Adon.
In the end, the presentation for both games is solid. It's not the best from the N64 that I've seen, but it has its shining moments, like the visuals from the second game, with the exception of that terrible frame rate. Now I'm going to talk about level design. These two games actually are very different in their approach to levels, so much so that I'm not exactly sure how to compare them. Let's start with the first game. The Hub Ruins is very linear in structure. There weren't any moments I got lost. However, there are certain areas that, if the player explores a bit, they can receive weapons faster, like the automatic shotgun. I love that. I also love the first few enemies in this level, because it teaches the player a simple but necessary fact. Different enemies take different amounts of damage. The first couple enemies are simple, one hit is all it takes, and then it introduces the Raptor, which takes 4 whole bullets to put down, and honestly it's a bit nerve-wracking trying to take it down for the first time. But now the player knows that there are various enemies who can take various amounts of damage. I'm not as big of a fan of the jungle. It feels like a continuation of the first, and it also has a few portions where you have to take a few leaps of faith, and I'm not a fan. However, it does have this area near the end in a cave where the player can see a minigun, but you can't get to it yet, and I remember thinking while playing, how am I going to get this weapon? Eventually, in level 4, I picked up a grenade launcher, and I was finally able to grab that minigun. I like that connection, but I'm not a big fan of how big the jungle is and how much you have to retread to get to the minigun. The ancient city is kind of nothing. Like, there's not a lot to it. It's got a lot of wide open spaces, and it's kind of easy to get lost in. This area is where I spent a lot of time confused. Very little direction and not much to say. The ruins is kind of cool. There are 3 different paths that can be taken near the beginning, but 2 of them are hidden. One of the paths, which like I said is near the beginning, leads to a level 8 key. It has some of the most nerve-wracking jumps in the game up to this point, which I think is something that can be said about this level in general. Controls are really good, but the ruins has an abundance of platforming segments, and first-person controls and platforming? No. This ain't Bayonetta. Finding the correct footing isn't the easiest task, and it's really easy to jump too soon or jump too far. Not gonna lie, this is where I started to dislike Turok. The Catacombs is pretty interesting. Most of the other levels, for the most part, have this sort of linear design to it, but the Catacombs feels a bit more non-linear. After the player goes into this level, they can take a multitude of different paths, which I always find exciting in levels. It makes me think about the level more. I have to think about the other paths so I don't forget anything. Most of the paths lead to the same place, but I still like it. Treetop Village, from a presentation perspective, is actually really cool. It starts off looking like levels 1 and 2, which kind of disappointed me at first, but plot twist, it really starts to change. The player has to descend, which is a bit nerve-wracking, but it's a nice pace. And then you're thrown into this treetop area, and while there's no real threat of falling, it always feels dangerous. Having to fight in these narrow spaces makes it feel this way, and there are a lot of enemies here. The Lost Lands, in terms of difficulty, feels like a final level. It's got some of the hardest enemies I had to fight in the game, also introduced in nicely controlled environments, the most frustrating jumps in the game, and it's hecka long too. There's honestly not a lot to say about it. Visually, it looks like a good mesh of everything else in the game, and from a design standpoint, it wraps a lot of the things up with a final challenge of sort. The final confrontation feels like a maze. It's leading to the final boss fights, and there are so many enemies here. Most of them take a lot more hits than usual, but I found it's a lot more effective just to avoid them all. You can honestly just skip by them and keep moving forward, whereas with other levels, I wanted to clear out enemies so then I could thoroughly search the area safely. This place is a straight shot to the end. Straight shot through a maze. Not bad, but worth noting. I think that maybe the difficulty level in Turok is a bit too hard, and this is for a few reasons. As far as I know, ammo and health are limited, but enemies are not. Enemies regenerate, and not all enemies drop health or ammo when they die. Some do, but not all. So you kill an enemy, which takes ammo and sometimes health, and then that enemy regenerates after a few seconds, which takes more ammo and health. I hate it. Also, there are too many times in the game where enemies will see you before you can see them. This can be because they're behind a corner or in the draw distance. They can get in cheap shots, and it's not fun. I do wish that once you beat a level, it would heal you. That would be nice. Not healing after levels feels unfair. I put it on easy. Why is it not easy? Also, there are so many parts where you have to platform, and this is not easy. I wanted to cartridge tilt this game until I shattered its board. Overall, solid level design. Turok 2 is a bit different. Quick breakdown. Like the first, most levels are pretty linear, but Turok 2 is way more about exploration, which I've been told was influenced by GoldenEye. It's linear in the sense that you go from warp portal to warp portal, but the places you're placed in are so big and there's so much to explore. Also, each level has missions on top of finding the keys. Also, you gotta come back to each level to fully complete the game. Also, this game's design is dang good if you're looking to get lost in the game for a few hours. And by a few hours, I mean so many hours. Port of Vadia is really big, which is something that can be said about all the levels. Turok 2's first level might be the largest first level I've ever encountered. It also sets a precedent for the rest of the game. If the player is not willing to search every nook and cranny, then it's impossible to finish this level, so it teaches the player to look. It's a bit troublesome, but overall not bad. In River of Souls, the player gets to ride this dinosaur. This is awesome. Walking through the first quarter of the stage and just blowing things up is really fun. I do have a small complaint about it though, and that's that I wish that you get to use the dinosaur at the beginning and end. I think that kind of sandwich design is good, but it lacks the sandwich. This is more tostada design. I think when levels start with something, that it's okay and even good to bring it back at the end to test the player. Death Marshes is the shortest level. One of the missions is to destroy these armory station thingies, but before you can blow them up, you have to find these charges. And one thing that's a bit difficult about this is that they hid the charges really well. It's just a reminder that you have to search everywhere. Also, this level's a bit too dark. Just wanted to say that. Lair of the Blind Ones ain't bad. This is one of the levels that feels like a maze. It's still linear in structure, but you're always moving forward. There's this area in particular where the player is stuck in a maze underwater, and the pressure here, trying to make it out of the maze without drowning, is intense. The enemies here are some orc-like creatures, and they're actually really strong. It was one of the first areas in the game where the enemies started to feel more intense. Hive of the Mantids, while visually the most interesting level in the game, is also very frustrating. There are so many parts in this level where enemies will see you before you see them, and they're pretty strong here. One of the missions is to destroy these embryos, but it takes so long to do so, and the enemies who guard it will stand in the way of the door, and they take forever to kill. So by the time that you get to the room, you're probably halfway down in health, and then enemies here respawn, so you die a bunch and give up and just do the infinite lives cheat, but then you feel like a failure because you couldn't beat Turok 2 without cheating. And also, you used bad words when you were in this level, and your grandma heard, and she's disappointed, but even more so, she decided that she didn't like this level either because it makes her grandson angry, and then she bought her grandson ice cream because she's a pretty cool grandma. Yeah. The last level is Primogen's light ship, and I think it's overall better than the first game's final level. Because of the mission structure, it's an engaging level. It's also fairly linear. I like it especially because you start near the final room, but you have to enter other areas of the level first to unlock the last door. Each step of unlocking the last door sort of builds on each other, and the tension was killing me. However, it has these very stupid moments where you have to use a fan to float up or down, and it's so slow. I hate it. A couple more notes on Turok 2's levels. I think that at the end of the day, it's designed very well. It's not nearly as hard, and when it's hard, it feels fair. I played it on normal accidentally, but I was still able to make it through with about as much trouble as I had with the first. However, these levels are a tad bit too big. I like that the levels are engaging almost the entire way through, but they're just way too big. Enemies are placed all over the place, and since the levels are mission-based, there's a lot of exploring to do. Unlike the first game, the enemies only respawn if you load up in the area again, and sometimes ammo will respawn at special points. It's a smoother, more balanced system. Overall, I find both games designed good, but I think that Turok 2 uses the playstyle, first person, a lot better, whereas sometimes Turok 1 shows off the limitations of that style. In Turok, there are 4 bosses, and I like how they look, but when you break them all down from a design standpoint, they're essentially the same. You shoot them a lot. You just shoot them a lot. The key difference is how they move and attack. The Commando Jeeps boss essentially is just 2 cars that go around in circles a lot. You shoot them, then it's a dude, and you shoot him. He really rushes you a lot. The giant mantis can walk on walls in the ceiling, so it can be hard to hit. Gotta use long-range weapons. You shoot it. The bionic T-Rex is pretty difficult. It charges a lot and has a long-distance fire breath attack. You shoot it. Then there's the Campaigner. He can teleport a lot, which makes this boss fight very frenetic, but you shoot him. It's what you do. Now, of course, in a game where you shoot things, you're gonna shoot the bosses, but from looking at the bosses, it's really hard to find a true difference in them design-wise, especially when you compare them to Turok 2's bosses. Turok 2 has 4 bosses. GoldenEye, yes, that's its name, is the first boss, and it's on the ceiling. There are various attack cycles that this boss goes through, and you have to damage whatever GoldenEye attacks with before you can hit its weak spot, the eye. Queen Mantid is overall an enjoyable fight. A lot of this fight is destroying the Queen's minions and then shooting her weak spot at that moment. Once the weak spot is damaged enough, you need to move on to another weak spot. And with this fight, it's sometimes hard to hit the weak spot because she rushes you a lot. The next fight is Mother. I really liked this fight. It has a bit more of a cinematic feel to it than the other ones did, and also shows you how to dodge Mother's first attack in a cutscene. This one, once again, is targeting the weak spot, which is the arms for a couple cycles. Then you move on to the head. With this boss being as big as it is, this boss really controls the fight. Interesting fight, and my favorite thing about it is you end up actually not killing Mother. It just crawls back up where it came from once you've beaten it. Primogen is the final boss fight and is actually pretty easy. The hard part about this fight is how long it is. Once you think you've gotten him beat, he heals. Sometimes he heals all the way. Why? Part of me really hated seeing him heal like this. It makes the boss fight feel hopeless, but in hindsight, I really like it. Up to this point, you're taught that once the bar goes down, you win, but this fight turns that on the player, and I like that bait and switch. It does add a sense of hopelessness to the fight, and I kind of like that feeling in the final boss fight. Overall, Turok 2 has better fights. While the bosses are essentially the same in the sense that you have to aim for the weak spot, I find them a lot more engaging, while the bosses in Turok 1 are just chaos until the finish. There's little to no structure to them. The games have cheat codes, like I already mentioned. You got basic codes like infinite lives, infinite ammo, and invincibility. Then there are fun cheat codes like big head mode, tiny enemies, and disco mode. The cheat codes vary from game to game, but there are interesting ones in each, and they're pretty similar when you get down to it, so I can't really say that either has better cheat codes. However, Turok 2 has multiplayer. There are 3 modes, and they suck. What doesn't suck about them? You can pick a whole bunch of characters from the game to play as, including the Raptors. That's nice. But these modes are kind of boring. There's Bloodlust, where you run around and kill each other. It can be fun depending on the friend that you have, but the mode lacks music. So if you and your friend are walking around aimlessly, there's no music to kind of help drive either one of you forward. Then there's Team Blood, which is Bloodlust, but 2 on 2. I don't know 3 other people who would try it with me. I imagine it's more fun than regular Bloodlust. And then there's my favorite mode, Frag Tag, which is where one player is turned into a monkey and the other player has to chase them down and kill them. I love it, except it doesn't have music, and the map that me and my friend, we'll call him Grandma, played on had the 2 warps way too close to each other, which transforms the player from the monkey back into their original form. So our games looked like this. Fun overall, but not the most well thought out. And now it's time for what roughly 25% of you just skipped to, the conclusion. Turok is very much a game for its time, and by that, I mean that the things that worked back in the 90s work for Turok. A story in the manual and a ridiculous difficulty level. Turok is very good, but very frustrating. Turok 2 took what made the first game good and improved it, and took what made the first game frustrating and removed it. In the end, Turok 1 has better movement, but I think that everything else, story, presentation, level design, bosses, and even bonus modes, it did better. Turok Dinosaur Hunter is a solid game, but Turok 2 Seeds of Evil Evil is arguably a great game, so it should go without saying, but I have to say it because it's my video, that the winner of this bout is Turok 2 Seeds of Evil.
And there it is, Turok 2 takes the win, just like I said at the beginning of the video. I hope you enjoyed the video. I've actually had this Versus planned out since the very beginning of Versus, but I just needed to find the time. I'm very glad that I found the time to finally play and beat these games though. And to my old friend Matt, did you graduate high school? You seem like the kind of person who'd end up in jail. You know what, probably now is not the time. Thanks for watching, until next time.
It's only been 2 months, but I'm finding it hard to adjust to a life in America again. I've heard about this kind of thing, reverse culture shock. When people study abroad, they get so used to life in the other country, so that when they come home, it's difficult to readjust. I'm not quite sure why this is. You'd think that spending 23 years in one place and 1 year in another, that it'd be easy to adjust, but I can't explain. But it's not just that. I miss the people. While living in Japan, I started to miss American food pretty quickly, and I stumbled upon a small store close to campus that claimed to be an American diner. The diner was ran by 2 people, a husband and wife. When I first went, my Japanese was very basic, and to be quite frank, very bad. I knew enough to introduce myself, tell them where I was from, and explain that I wanted to eat American food. Funnily enough, this diner, while American themed, mostly served only Japanese food. They had sandwiches and, per my recommendation, started serving pizzas. They also served floats, but not root beer floats. But because I recommended that they do so, they added root beer to the menu. They even wrote up a flyer saying that their American customer recommended root beer. My name was even put in the menu. I spent a lot of time in this diner. I met interesting people and had wonderful conversations with drunk strangers. But most of all, the couple who ran the diner, they became 2 of the closest people I met in Japan. I ended up calling them my Japanese parents because when I needed someone to talk to, they were always there. They even gave me a Japanese name. I called them Master and Mama. And this message goes out to them. I know this isn't a very Japanese-like quality, and you can't understand a lot of English, but Master, Mama, I want to say that I miss and love you too. I hope that everything is okay, and that one day we can see each other again. First thing that I'll do when I come back to Fukuoka is get on the subway, and I'm coming to see you. Your American son, Riku.